Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Superman and Swamp Thing, The Jungle Line. Now, this is a one-shot Superman/Swamp Thing comic published in 1985 in DC Presents issue 85. Now, this was written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Rick Veitch, or Veitch, I'm not really sure how to say his last name. Now, of course, the character of Superman was originally created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and the character of Swamp Thing was originally created by Len Wein, I'm not really sure how to say his last name, and Bernie Wrightson. Now, while Alan Moore did not create Swamp Thing, he very much reinvented the character with his run on Swamp Thing, where he gave him more of a supernatural origin, and he also had Swamp Thing fighting demons and vampires and ghosts, and he also incorporated biblical allegories into his Swamp Thing comics. Like, I think there was a point where Swamp Thing actually went to heaven and hell, and I think Alan Moore actually wanted Swamp Thing to meet Jesus at one point, but I think DC wouldn't let him do it because I think they thought it would be too controversial. Also, it was in Alan Moore's Swamp Thing comics where you were introduced to the character of John Constantine, who would later be spun off into the Hellblazer series. Now, I know most of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing comics were collected into a 6-volume graphic novel series. I'm not sure if this story is included in those, but I have this story in this collection here called DC Universe by Alan Moore. Now, admittedly, this feels more like a Superman story than a Swamp Thing story. This feels like a Superman story that Swamp Thing just happens to make a guest appearance in. Now, the plot of The Jungle Line is Superman is driving down south, driving, not flying, and he's driving down there to die. In the story, you find out that Clark Kent for the Daily Planet was covering this science conference where apparently scientists discovered this meteorite with this weird alien fungus growing on it, and the minute Clark Kent saw this fungus, he realized that this was actually from a jungle on Krypton, obviously before Krypton blew up, and apparently this fungus is extremely deadly to Kryptonians. So Superman starts losing his powers, and he develops this fever, and he starts hallucinating, where essentially he's seeing the ghost of extinct creatures from Krypton who are taunting him, and what happens is, as he's driving down south, his car crashes into a swamp, which turns out to be Swamp Thing's swamp, and the story is really about Swamp Thing trying to save Superman. Now, I thought The Jungle Line was a decent little story, but it's nothing spectacular or groundbreaking in my opinion, and I feel like it's too short. Granted, I don't know if I should really blame Alan Moore for that. I don't know if maybe DC gave him a limit on how long this story could be, but I feel like the story could be longer. I do think the most interesting aspect of this story is sort of this exploration of the idea of Superman being the last of an extinct species. Granted, if you take into account characters like Supergirl and General Zod, he's not the last of his species, but I see what Alan Moore was going for. Like, when he's having these visions of these extinct creatures from Krypton, they're almost like sort of tempting him, saying, "Come join us in extinction." You do get some interesting themes about identity in this story, where there's a certain point where one of Superman's hallucinations is he's being spoken to by both his Superman suit and his Clark Kent suit, and you get this real sense of what is his true identity. Is it Clark Kent or is it Superman? Or you could argue that his true identity is Kal-El, and both Clark Kent and Superman are just alter egos that he fits into. Now, I do believe identity is a major theme that Alan Moore touches on in his Swamp Thing comics, because I know Alan Moore's version of Swamp Thing is not actually Alec Holland, but he only has the memory of Alec Holland. But besides those themes, I thought the story was just okay. It's nothing spectacular. It's nothing where I'm like, oh man, you have to read this. It's not like For the Man Who Has Everything, which I thought was excellent, and it's not like another great Superman story he wrote, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is actually going to be my next book review. This one, it's just sort of a, like, I think it's just alright. But that was my review on Superman and Swamp Thing, the Jungle Line, and bye.